You are with Cape Talk.
Views and News with Clarence Ford.
Welcome back. It is 9:34. Views and News on the Clarence till 12 o'clock. And of course, that huge appointment now with the Naked Scientist, Dr. Chris Smith, joining us from the UK, the Naked Scientist, to answer your questions. Welcome, Chris. Great to have you back.
Hi, Clarence. Good morning. Do you know, I had an amazing conversation. You know, sometimes you interview scientists and they just sort of send a light bulb moment through your mind. And I talked to this guy yesterday in Hawaii, Dan Rubinoff. Fascinating story. And in fact, I've got the interview, which we're just about to publish on the Naked Scientist website. If you go to nakedscientist.com later today, it'll be there. But he has got a paper out in the journal Science this week of this spider and caterpillar that have an unusual relationship. The caterpillar is called the bone collector caterpillar. It's carnivorous, this caterpillar. Very, very rare. Most caterpillars are completely herbivorous. They eat plants. This one eats meat. So what's it doing? Well, on a remote mountainside, on one tiny island in the Hawaiian Islands, this caterpillar, which is a caterpillar for a moth, gets into the webs of certain species of spider, and it goes hunting round and it finds the debris and detritus left over from the spider's last meal. This includes bits of dead insect leg, bits of the beetle back, bits of an ant head or whatever, and it covers itself in these dead bits of insect body to make itself look like an insect corpse that's already been eaten. So the spider ignores it. Meanwhile, when the spider then does catch something, the caterpillar goes and gets first dibs and has this amazing relationship with the spider. It completely is ignored by the spider and it exploits the spider's leftovers. And once it's got big enough, it crawls away from the web, it pupates, turns into a moth, flies off, mates, and the cycle repeats itself. But it's only found in one tiny area, about a 15 square kilometre area of Hawaii. Isn't that extraordinary?
Absolutely extraordinary. And so too the finding earlier this week, or we interacted with a scientist around what scientists call the strongest evidence yet of potential life on a distant planet, K218b. And of course, following that conversation, people wanted me to direct additional questions to you.
Well, I've talked to Madhu, who's the scientist behind that study, because he's been looking at this, ploughing this furrow for quite some time, looking for molecules linked to life. This is one particular molecule called DMS, which is dimethyl sulfide. This is thought to be a really strong marker for life because, and what part of the reason why this planet, which is 124 light years away, why we think this is a good strong life prospect is that they didn't just detect the signal once. This stuff doesn't hang around for very long, this DMS signal. It breaks down quite quickly. So to detect it and detect it at large levels argues that there's lots of it being continuously produced. And although it could be produced from other sources, life is a common source on Earth, and therefore we think this could be linked to biology. So he's pretty optimistic that we might be looking at our first discovery of life processes, biology of some form, sort of admittedly a long way away, but for us to find.
Yes, indeed. And it's exciting. They say they need a lot more proof. Maybe just it's not definitive proof that they have just yet. But the distinction between life and intelligent life, where is that particular point?
Well, that's the point, isn't it? All this tells us is that there are life processes potentially. Yes, it's got to be confirmed. I mean, the way they're doing this is they're using the James Webb Space Telescope, very, very powerful, launched a few years ago, and it can see through the atmospheres of distant worlds. And what you do is use the nearby starlight from that world shining through the atmosphere. And as Robert Bunsen, the chemist who we named the Bunsen burner after, discovered over 100 years ago, different chemicals absorb and emit chemicals of emit light of different colours. So when the atmosphere of the planet goes in front of the star, then the different molecules in the atmosphere both absorb and emit different colours of light. And if you look at those colours, you can see what must be in the atmosphere. And that then tells you that you can find probably that particular chemical in that particular atmosphere. So that tells us there might be biology there, but it tells us nothing about that biology, if it is there. If there is life there, well, it might be a sea of bacteria. or bacterial-like organisms. It might be algal-like things. We know that our own planet was dominated for billions of years by single-celled organisms. There was nothing complicated about life on Earth until more than 600-700 million years ago. It was for billions of years just the preserve of microbes, and very, very simple microbes at that. But boy, did they do an important job, because they transformed the planet into something that ultimately complicated life like us could inhabit. So intelligence is a very different thing, an intelligent life, very different thing than just life. But we will not know in the near future, because this place is 124 light years away. That didn't stop some cartoonists putting a note in the or a cartoon in some of the newspapers in the UK where they had a picture of Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, saying, yes, we found life on this planet 124 light years away, and that means a trade deal is within easy reach.
Sure. So just that distinction, where and how is it made? Because an elephant is an intelligent life form as well, is it not?
Well, yes, it is. I mean, an elephant can make decisions, and it can react to changes in the environment, and it can have a memory of what it's done before to solve problems, etc., etc. So we would argue, yes, elephants are very intelligent, but no one's saying there are elephants on this planet 124 light years away. But I think we're going to have to wait a little while yet, if not 124 years, in order to find out what's really going on.
Okay, well, let's leave it for now. I'm certain there's plenty of questions still on K2-18b. That's the planet that the Naked Scientist is referring to. Let's get to your questions. Morning, Dr. Smith. And this is another conversation that we've had right here and during the course of this week. I heard the other day that shingles injection helps prevent dementia. Please give us more information.
Yes, I actually spoke to the scientists behind this. And in fact, if you go to the Naked Scientist website and pick up the program from a couple of weeks ago, you can actually listen to the interview in full. What this group of scientists did was to exploit a natural opportunity that presented itself thanks to the vaccine program in the United Kingdom. Because in 2013, we rolled out the immunisation for anyone under the age of 80 and over the age of 65 against shingles. There were some people who, because of the way their birthday fell, were just outside the scope of getting that vaccine, but were otherwise identical in almost all ways to a person who was born a few days before them, who lives in the same area, who did get the vaccine. So what this group did was to follow up for 7 years the people who both did or didn't get that shingles vaccine and see what their outcomes were. Now, apart from being very effective at preventing shingles, which does become more common as we get older and is one manifestation linked to the virus that causes chicken pox. Once you've had chicken pox, the virus lives in your nervous system for the rest of your life and periodically can re-emerge as painful skin rashes called shingles. And it's fully infectious and extremely unpleasant, which is why we seek to prevent it. But they found that the people who did have the vaccine were up to 20% less likely to have been diagnosed with dementia in the 7 years since they were given that vaccine during the follow-up period, compared to people who didn't have the shingles vaccine. Now, they don't know exactly why. This is merely an observational study. They've looked at the numbers and said this is the pattern that appears to emerge. But it is tantalizing to say, well, what is this virus doing to the nervous system? We know it is spread throughout the nervous system of the human body in the peripheral nervous system, but clearly also has some influence on what goes on in the brain. What is this vaccine doing to either the behavior of the virus we carry in us, or is it doing something else to the immune system? But in some respects, it must be reducing inflammation, and perhaps that inflammation is linked to a reduction in Alzheimer's and other kinds of dementia risk. We don't know at the moment, but their next study will be following up on some of these interesting leads to see why and what the mechanism is behind this very, very significant reduction in dementia risk in people who are around the age of 80.
Angela, you want to watch that space. In fact, I think there's a whole lot of us that want to watch that space. Now, let's go to the WhatsApp line. Let's take a listen.
Good morning, Professor Chris Smith. I've seen an article following that article that was done by Professor Yihai Shao regarding sweeteners linked to heart diseases. There's another article that I was reading through from Dr. Francesco Branca regarding artificial sweeteners found in diet drinks linked to brain changes that increases appetite. Have you ever looked at that? And then what are the chances that artificial sweeteners increase our appetite, make us eat more instead of having us to help with our diet.
This is a very fertile area for discussion, debate, and investigation at the moment because, of course, the world is confronting an obesity pandemic. About 43% of the world population are now obese, which is a huge problem. And we are effectively sleepwalking into a health crisis, which is going to make COVID look like a walk in the park, both in economic but also in human health terms. So people are very, very worried about this. And one approach, we believe, to managing weight better is that sugar causes weight gain. So therefore, if we substitute stuff which is sweet like sugar but doesn't have the calorie burden, maybe that's a good idea. Or is it? Because what actually appears to be emerging is a different picture. There was a study recently from Sweden where researchers there, inspired actually by a can of artificially sweetened drink in a lab meeting, decided to look at what feeding mice, which developed the rodent equivalent of heart disease in a human, with artificial sweeteners would do to their disease risk. And the group leader said to me that he no longer goes anywhere near artificial sweeteners because these mice developed dramatically accelerated furring up of their blood vessels when they were given aspartame, one of these sweeteners, compared to mice that weren't. So it does appear to provoke an acceleration of that particular disease risk. Their speculation is that the sweeteners produce a state of inflammation in the walls of blood vessels because they provoke a big release of insulin. Even though there's no sugar coming into the body thinks because it tastes sweet, you need insulin, and that causes the problem. There's also evidence that these things may affect the functioning of the immune system, and there are some claims that they may be linked to other conditions as well. So in terms of do they reprogram our sweetness response, this is also an area of concern because the argument goes that the brain counts calories. When we eat something sweet, the brain anticipates, because it's sweet, that there's some calories coming in, and therefore it dials down your appetite and says you can slow down eating now because there's calories coming in, we don't want to overeat. If you reprogram that system by saying to the brain every time it gets a dose of something sweet, well, there are no calories in it, when something with some sweet calories do come along, you tend to overeat because your brain has had the sensitivity to sweetness reset. And there's some evidence to suggest that cans of fizzy pop and things full of sugar, full of artificial sweeteners, not sugar, do this. And so that's one of the other concerns, that sweeteners and things that paradoxically are supposed to help us to lose weight may in fact be provoking us to gain weight.
And did you take your cue from that lead researcher on the topic?
Well, to be honest with you, I'm not a big fan of fizzy pop. I very rarely have any of these things, and it's all about the dose, right? The odd exposure to things is not going to do you much harm. I mean, obviously there are exceptions to that. I wouldn't go and dabble with some cyanide or some arsenic because that's pretty toxic. But in most of these sort of food-related arguments, it's all about long-term behaviour. And if you have a little bit of something here and there, it's probably going to make absolutely no difference. If you have a sustained intake of something over a long period of time, this is likely to have effects. And so I don't really go near these things, but there are people who do, and they take a lot of these things in regularly, and they may well be affecting their health because they're eating a lot of these things, drinking a lot of these things, and therefore affecting their health via these other mechanisms which had previously not been tested, because you can't ask a mouse how it's feeling or how hungry it is. You just see what it does in the short term on a mouse. A human is not a mouse, and therefore we've had to have enough time go by to follow up in order to find out what really happens to us in the long term when we're exposed to these things.
Question for the Naked Scientist from KK. Do chickens have twins or triplets? I'm asking that because recently I've been having double yolks in the eggs, which are extra large. Is that normal? The eggs don't even smell like eggs.
Initially, when I thought, hang on a minute, where's this question going? Because, of course, chickens lay eggs all the time, and if they're fertilised, those eggs will turn into lots of chicks, so they're continuously having chicks. But yes, you can get double yolkers. I've never seen a 3-yolker, but in theory that could be possible. The way this happens is that when an egg forms inside the chicken, it forms way up at the top of the oviduct, and initially it starts off as the egg which is then wrapped up in a shell. So if two eggs are side by side, they can get invested in the same shell, and that's what a double yolker is. You basically got two potential embryos within one shell. And were that fertilized, you could, in theory, get two chicks developing in that one egg. They have less space to play with, so this may have an impact on them. They might be born a bit early. That might not be good. But in theory, yes, you could have two chicks inside one egg. I've never seen one with three, though. But it's a natural phenomenon, and I believe that some chickens are more prone to having this sort of egg type than others. But if there are any chickenologists out there who rear chickens and can tell me actually factually if that's true, do phone us up and let us know.
And that's not the egg that's split. That's two eggs in a shell.
That's two yolks in one shell.
Let's go to John or Johan's question. Hi, how is obesity measured? When will you be seen as obese if 43% of people are obese? BMI has measured me as overweight my whole life, but I've always been tall and thin. That's Johan in Paarl.
Hi, Johan. Well, you ask a very good question, which is that it's very difficult to do this in a way which isn't caught out or tripped up by certain situations. Let me give you an example. If I am Linford Christie, who was an award-winning and medaling Olympic athlete, who was a tall guy, and I measured his BMI, also known as the Quetelet Index, which is where you take your weight in kilos and you divide it by your height squared, and you get a number. If I took his BMI as an Olympic 100-metre and 200-metre sprinter, I would declare this world-class athlete to be obese. Why? Because his body mass is very high. Why? Because he's absolutely, or was when he was in peak performance condition, covered in muscles. And muscle is very, very dense, very, very heavy, and you therefore have a very high body mass. Not an ounce of fat on that guy's body. So this is misleading. When you have a number which is between 20 and 25 for your BMI and you're not an Olympic athlete, this is judged to be a healthy body weight and a healthy BMI, body mass index. When you go above 25, you're overweight, and when you go above 30, you are obese. When you go above 40, you're morbidly obese. I had a patient I saw this week who was BMI 78. I've never seen anyone with a BMI that high. So it's a useful guide if you're not an Olympic athlete, and it tells us, or it maps onto good health, bad health. And the higher that BMI number, the greater your disease risk. So it's not unreasonable. Other ways of doing this include, or other measures are to look at your waist to hip ratio. If you take measure around your waist and then take measure around your hips, if your waist to hip ratio is greater than 1, this is an earmark of poorer health and a higher risk of heart disease, cardiovascular risk, because putting on gut obesity or gut flab, a beer belly, in other words, this is associated with a higher risk for a number of different metabolic diseases, including diabetes. But the BMI is currently our one we're using as a standardized way of doing this all around the world, but it can be misleading. So you've got to be really careful. If you're that athlete and you're strapped in muscles, you will get a BMI that tells you are obese and you're not.
Okay, we've got a voice note in. I think it's from Alice. Let's take a listen.
Hi, Clarence. In regard to the shingles vaccine and dementia, can't it just be that people who take the shingles vaccine is more likely to believe in science and living a healthy life? So their lifestyle choices are healthier, and so the chances of them getting dementia is lower. Thank you. Great show.
This is a brilliant point, and I put that very question to the authors of the study, who went to extraordinary lengths to control for precisely this. It's a really important point, which is that people who adopt a healthier lifestyle are more likely to avail themselves of various preventative health measures, and are therefore probably also doing all the right things, like not smoking, taking regular exercise, having a big friendship group, being very socially well networked, all things that we know are protective against dementia. Well, that's where the power of this study came in, because it involved the whole of the population of Wales of a certain age who were offered the vaccine and either took it or didn't. They could control for people who were in exactly this position, and the strength of the relationship was preserved, arguing it probably isn't down to one of these confounding factors. It probably is a real statistical relationship.
Lots of questions in about dementia, and of course the link to the shingles vaccine. But it's at the discovery stage, so there's a whole lot of development that still needs to happen there. Maybe you just want to clarify the process because Sarah's wanting to know when the vaccine will be available.
Well, we had shingles vaccines for a long time, and historically we were using a weakened form of the chickenpox virus called the Oka strain of the virus, which we would give in very high dose as the shingles vaccine. And this has recently, in some countries, the UK is one of them, been switched in favour of a new vaccine which doesn't have any live component to it. It's just part of the outer coat of the virus, which is now in the vaccine. And the advantage of that is that anyone can use it. If you have a live vaccine, there's a risk for individuals who are pregnant, individuals who have an immune problem, individuals who can't have live vaccines. So by using the non-live vaccine, which we now have, the new shingles vaccine, this problem goes away. But we believe we'll still get the protective effect from it.
I think the question is directly related to a vaccine for dementia.
There is no specific vaccine at the moment for dementia, but there are drugs in trial which work in a similar sort of way. There was an attempt to create a vaccine for dementia about 20 years ago. I think the company was Wyeth and they were working in Ireland, and they had a big study where they were vaccinating people against their own beta amyloid, which is the chemical that builds up in the brains of people with Alzheimer's disease. That trial had to stop because some people developed inflammatory syndromes. But in recent years, we've seen very successful trials, although with, successful trials, the trials showed an effect. The effect, though, was moderate. We've got drugs now, things like donanemab and lecanemab. These are antibodies. They're made in the laboratory, but infused into the patient. So it's sort of like a passive vaccine. Those antibodies are directed against beta amyloid. And when given to patients for a period of time, you have to have regular infusions because antibodies can't be taken by mouth because they're a protein and the stomach would digest them. So you have to inject them. But given to patients who already had evidence of incipient Alzheimer's disease, they slowed down the progression of the disease by about 30%. Now, this was enough for people to say, this is very encouraging, very exciting, and this is successful in some respects. It shows that this disease can be slowed, but the effect was judged to be too small for many regulators, including the European Medicines Agency and other regulators, to say, we'll get behind this and say this should be regarded as de rigueur for anyone who might be at risk of Alzheimer's disease. We need more trials, and we need more follow-up and perhaps an earlier intervention. People argue, had we started doing this earlier, would the gains have been bigger? We don't know at the moment, but there's no formal vaccine against dementia, but there is this immune therapy that might turn into something in the years ahead.
We got to wrap it there, and a big thank you, as always, to Dr. Chris Smith, lecturer at the University of Cambridge, the Naked Scientist. Every Friday, just after 9:30, he pops by to answer your questions. Thank you for your questions. It is 2 minutes to 10. News coming your way at the top of the hour, and Natalie Malchus is standing by.